Tucker Carlson dropped a very long interview. We're talking more than 2 hours long with Andrew Tate from Romania. Tucker Carlson flew to Romania and dropped this for Tucker on Twitter because he was assured, sounds like directly from Elon Musk, that it wouldn't be censored at all. I imagine if he had uploaded this full 2+ hours to YouTube, there would be some real problems.
He's been banned from YouTube, right, Tate?
Probably.
I think he has.
But I don't know if interviews with him have been, though. So, like, is it different if you're actually interviewing? I don't know. But I would imagine that it would have been more difficult.
That's an interesting question. I don't know.
Right. So let's just get straight to some clips here because, again, we're talking about a 2+ hour long interview, and there's just a ton to break down. They talked about a lot of different stuff, as you can imagine. So let's roll E1 right off the bat.
Up until this point, never really commented too heavily on politics.
Yes.
But I understand very well, I like to believe, what's happening with Ukraine and Russia. And what I will say to the people who are watching this at home is that if you are naive enough to believe that there are good guys and bad guys in wars, and it's as simple as good and bad, and that the bad guys are crazy and the good guys want freedom, then you need to do a little bit more investigation into what's really happening. And when you look at the vested interest of any country or any person.
Can I just ask you to pause and just comment? That's the truest thing, what you just said. That is and anyone who doesn't understand that should shut the fuck up. And I mean it. Having seen war.
Looks like they're wearing matching loafers.
Do you think they planned that?
I hope not. That would be a little too. That would be a little too weird.
It would be. One fact check though. What he seems to be saying, what Tucker's saying, is that the Ukrainians are not the good guys in this war. But hasn't Tucker said that the Russians are the good guys in this war? That he was rooting for the Russians? Like, you can't have it both ways. If there's no good guys, then is Tucker finally acknowledging that the Russians are also not the good guys?
Well, he said at one point, I'm trying to find the exact quote, he said something like, it almost makes me root for Russia or root for Putin, something like that. And it was sort of a rhetorical thing where he was, back and forth. I think he walked it back.
There's an element of that calls itself anti-war that is legitimately straight up just rooting for Russia and calling Russia good guys in this war. Yes. So now I guess you're crosswise with Tucker and Andrew Tate, if that's your position.
And
no good guys. So
not only did they talk about Russia versus Ukraine, they kept going. That was actually even later in the interview, I think, but we can roll SOT number 2 here, E2.
So what is it about your message, do you think, that infuriates certain people?
Well, my message is traditional masculinity. My message is to stand up and say what you mean and mean what you say. And even going to the gym nowadays is an act of defiance, because when you have a man who's built with any degree of principle, you say no to things. And I think if I have to analyze my message and why I'm so disliked by the people who dislike me, it's not the things I'm saying. It's the fact that if you adhere to my principles and you adhere to the things I say, you end up being the kind of person who will resist certain ideas. You say no. What kind of man never says no? Name a man who never says no. Men say no, right? Men wake up and say, no, I don't think that should be done this way. No, my children will not be taught that.
It's the father's primary job.
Absolutely. So when you say to men, listen, you're allowed to have an opinion. You're allowed to have standards. You're allowed to have boundaries and barriers. You're allowed to get up and become important and work hard and try hard and become the kind of man who can't be controlled. Then you're seen as an enemy. And especially with the massive influence I've gained, I think they look at me and go, he's helping men resist the slave programming. We don't need him around. We need to empty their brains so we can inject the slave programming and convince men to be eunuchs, because once you're eunuched, then you're not a threat.
Every time you say no, I'm going to think of it in a different context now.
That's what men say. What do you make of this guy?
There's so much to say. Why don't we roll the next clip and then we can break it all down? This is E3.
It's one of those charges that kind of sells itself.
Oh, absolutely. And it doesn't matter if you're found guilty or not, right? You're a human trafficker forever. But I do think that public consciousness is changing. I think with things like there's been some very large court cases recently involving some very famous people in which women were caught lying, trying to slander men's names for rape and these kinds of things. And I don't think people believe it anymore. But that scares me to a degree, because I think that the typical weapon, the standardized playbook, is now failing, and I don't know what the new playbook's going to be. It's almost like better the devil you know. That you're too famous, you're too successful, we don't like you. Call him a rapist or a human trafficker, put him all over the news, slander his name, try and wreck his life. Now that nobody believes it, what's the next move? What are they going to try next?
Wouldn't it just have been easier to commit like a massive financial crime and defraud people of billions, come up with like a fake cryptocurrency, call it like, I don't know, FTX, or just give a name to it.
Yeah, something random.
You know, steal billions and get your parents involved and buy a bunch of real estate in the Bahamas, and then like you'd be sort of a hero, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I would have certainly made a lot more money than TikTok, because I don't think TikTok even pays you for views. And if it certainly does, I never got a single transaction from it. So it's a very interesting scenario. But if I was accused of a financial crime, my name would not be slandered. So
no, of course. Well, of course not.
Hey, first of all, he's talking about Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah.
And I keep hearing this from the right, that it's so unfair the way he got treated. Guy's under indictment and might spend the rest of his life in prison.
That Bankman-Fried is being
Sam
treated too.
Bankman-Fried.
Aren't
they going to update that talking point at some point based on the fact that he very likely might spend the rest of his life in jail?
I assumed what Tucker meant was
he'd be celebrated by the media or whatever.
Yeah, that he had, was being feted and had, Bill Clinton and whomever else at the FTX conferences before, even though it was sort of transparently a Ponzi scheme.
And you've got that Bankman-Fried quote where he told Wired, you say, or told, maybe it was a reporter at Vox, that you say these shibboleths so that people will say. So it's basically saying that. But okay, the last clip is on the charges, and this does not feel like a very hard-hitting interview on when you have someone who is charged with rape and human trafficking in front of you. He just sort of is like, so you didn't do this stuff, right? And he's like, no, I didn't do this stuff.
Yeah.
And then, oh, well, if you didn't do that stuff, then there must be a conspiracy about, and then let's unpack this conspiracy. What is it that has them coming after you? Rather than pressing, like, according to the news reports, there are women who say that you raped them. Mm-hmm. Beyond the foul, nasty kind of recruiting that he has openly said that he does, where he kind of would recruit women to come over, like get the boyfriend method, go get them to fall in love, and then kind of turn them out into like porn stars. Like, he's said that he does that, but beyond that, there are people accusing him of straight up rape, and that he's been charged with in Romania, and so. Everyone's innocent until proven guilty, but these are very serious charges that Tucker just seems to kind of just wave away and then work to kind of explain as a conspiracy among a feminized world that doesn't like him standing up for traditional masculinity. It's like, I think there might be a little bit more than that going on.
Tate reportedly tells Carlson that he is that the women who accuse him actually don't, like that the government has trumped up the charges. I think it's possible that some of the charges against him are trumped up, and he's saying that the government can't find women who truly claim that this was non-consensual, and the government is reading into it by using the human trafficking charge. But I think the broader point is that the legal questions of Andrew Tate are different than the moral questions from Andrew Tate. I actually have zero problem with Tucker engaging with him. I think some of those questions should have been a lot tougher.
Right. I think Peter Bergen interviewed Osama bin Laden.
Right.
Maybe for NBC News or Wall Street Journal, I forget who, and was celebrated for landing that interview. Like, it's Osama bin Laden, one of the most evil people of the last 50 years.
Megyn Kelly interviewed Putin.
Right. You should interview bad people.
Yeah.
Like, the bad people are part of the world, and it's important to know and get insight into their mentality.
And I also don't have a problem with one person in the media taking Andrew Tate seriously and saying this is a guy who has a ton of sincere followers, and we obviously have a masculinity crisis. There was a great Christine Emba essay in the Washington Post actually about that very topic this week. What can I learn from a good faith engagement with him? And there were some interesting parts of it, but I do find it, I don't know if strange is the right word. I don't know what is the right word, but it's very obvious. I mean, this is a quote from Andrew Tate's website. I've been running a webcam studio for nearly a decade. I've had over 75 girls work for me, and my business model is different than 99% of webcam studio owners. Over 50% of my employees were actually my girlfriend at the time, and of all girlfriends, none were in the adult entertainment industry before they met me. My job was to meet a girl, go on a few dates, sleep with her, test if she's quality, get her to fall in love with me where she'd do anything I say, and then get her on a webcam so we could become rich together. The moral element of that is very clear. That's sort of all out on the table. That's immoral, especially I think from the perspective, I say this as a Tucker's fellow Christian conservative, like that's absurd. And if you want to engage seriously in a good faith conversation about that, I actually think that's constructive.
Not a whole lot of family values going on there.
No. But the masculinity question, we were actually talking about this earlier when we were talking, oddly enough, in the Tommy Tuberville segment, when it's like, why is Tommy Tuberville flirting with this question? Like, why is he even taking white nationalism seriously? Well, there are probably a lot of places in rural Alabama, to your point about, why are so many white men in America like suddenly seeing themselves as victims on par with people who were trafficked into slavery and kept in bondage for hundreds of years. It's not comparable. If you go to places in rural Alabama that have been hollowed out by NAFTA and WTO, that people are, dying of fentanyl overdoses, addicted to pornography, numbing themselves with weed. Tucker actually prefaced his interview with Andrew Tate with a sort of a monologue on that. I think you can understand why Tate is appealing, why then ideologies like white nationalism are appealing. And the problem is that too few people in the media take any of that seriously. The problem then becomes that to balance it out, you end up getting Andrew Tate.
Yeah. Well, the left has long had a critique of this, quote unquote, family values, traditional conservatism as simply a mask for misogyny and racism.
Right.
And I think both the Tuberville and the Tate clips here help pull the mask off of that and say that there is a lot going on there. And I do think it's really important to try to understand Tate and the tens of millions of people behind him. But on the other hand, I think some of it is simple. And I think it's misogyny sells. Like we are still a very misogynistic world.
It's an easy pitch to men to say, like, the way to feel better about yourself is to do stuff that makes you feel really good.
Right.
Like, control women.
Right. Women are your problem. Girls are your problem. That's it. Yeah.
Control women, use them as sexual objects, etc.
Right. So I think that he gets a little. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of people selling misogyny, and he's selling it better than anybody else in the world at the moment. So in that sense, he's a talented misogynist. But I don't think there's any creativity in the idea of, wow, I can get rich by telling men that women are awful.
Yeah, there's something I think interestingly reactionary about what he specifically gets into, his turn to Islam. We talked about that on a previous edition of the show and had an interesting conversation about it. So I think
has he fully made that turn yet?
I'm not sure.
It's coming.
I think he has, though.
Yeah. If it hasn't come yet, it's coming.
Yeah.
All of these influencers who root their stuff in traditional values and misogyny, I think they're just bound for their own twisted version of some weird sectarian Islam.
I mean, the Tate direction, the Tate trajectory supports that. Although I do think, actually Jordan Peterson, there are other people who were unfairly.
He'll wind up there.
Well, Jordan Peterson. I think Jordan Peterson. No, he's not. Jordan Peterson.
He'll do some mystical version of it.
I think he's been studying Christianity really closely, but if people can watch his speech, his commencement address at Hillsdale, it gets into some interesting stuff on that. But he is someone who was so unfairly, I think, torn down. He was sort of a center-left, like, academic who was pushing him back against these things, and that I think nudged him in a direction where he does occasionally, I think, dip his toes in waters that are probably not great. But on the whole, I feel like he actually has been good for so many men. And the fact that he gets attacked over and over and over again in ways that are unfair, there's always fair criticisms of people who speak so much in the public domain. But he gets attacked on things that are so unfair so many times that this is how you end up with just Andrew Tate. Like, he becomes the influencer, not that we need, but the influencer we deserve, because we can't have constructive conversations anymore since we're all doing it on Twitter and Instagram, whatever else, which incentivizes the worst of human debate.
Well, either way, we can put this up here. It's getting an insane amount of traction on Twitter. As of this morning, it's 42.8 million views. I'm seeing now a ton of that is inflated. But if it's 10% of that, that's still 4 million more than I'd want absorbing this what I consider to be just a deeply kind of toxic way to think, and and an opiate, a soothing message to men that that they can find their problems outside of themselves by just identifying them and the women around them, and that's if they just understand that, then they're going to feel better about themselves.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.